This, I hope, wraps it up for this recording session. And what I want to do is talk about ongoing and continuing research. In the late 80s and the early 90s, we held the Department of Anthropology in the Research School of Pacific and Asian Studies held a 3-year project on comparative Austronesian. I was the head of that. It was interdisciplinary, so we had archaeologists, linguists, anthropologists, historians, and others join us in that effort. And we had all of the vacant, there's a turnover, or there was in the old way, the ANU worked, the research schools worked, there was a turnover so that you could bring in what were called research fellows. And we had several appointments allocated, and we were able to fill them with anthropologists working in different parts of the Austronesian world. One of whom, and I highlight him, one of whom was Clifford Sather, who is a very close friend. I had known him. He was, we first met in Doug Oliver's seminar at Harvard back in, what was it, about 1962. And I've known him off and on. He did remarkable work on the Bajau Laut, and then he did work on the Iban. He was a full participant for all the time of the project. He's recently died. I just make a note that he was a close friend, a close colleague, and a brilliant ethnographer, and made contributions in almost every one of the comparative Austronesian volumes. Now, you've asked me to hold them up, so I'll hold up 4 of these volumes if I can do that. Here are 4 of these volumes: The Austronesians, Origin, Ancestry, and Alliance, Inside Austronesian Houses, The Poetic Power of Place. All of them are part of a product of this comparative Austronesian project, which is run on and continued. So the most recent volumes, if I may hold them up, we've done this one on emotions, Austronesian emotions, and this is the one I've the dedication is to Michel Rosaldo, and this one on Austronesian paths and journeys. Okay, the Austronesian paths and journey. Well, first of all, there you go. There it is. And now this one, paths and journey. This one is dedicated to Marshall Sahlins, and I want to end this discussion with ideas of Marshall Sahlins. But this is Marshall Sahlins. There's a dedication to Marshall Sahlins as one of the great, to the memory of Marshall Sahlins as one of the brilliant, productive Austronesianists of our time. So the Comparative Austronesian Project. Comparative Austronesian Project though it ran in its most intense phase for only 3 years, it has continued and was a continuing research interest among many colleagues at the ANU. And there are many aspects to this. I'm not going to go into all of it, but the issue is this: you have people who are linguistically and that by that means culturally related. The question is how, and since this is in comparative terms, a relatively young language family. It's a language family that is spread out, as I say, from Madagascar to Hawaii and from Taiwan to Timor. It covers, well, something like 15,000 kilometers of land. So it covers a very large area. It was a remarkable migration. You can look at what was the underpinnings, the technological capacity of the Austronesians. It was the way they were able to use the kind of outrigger. The outrigger was an Austronesian invention, and as was a certain kind of a pivotal sail, all sorts of things. You can talk about the technology of the Austronesians. And one of the things we produced is this book. This is the original. It has a different cover. All of these books are available for download from the ANU Press. But this volume, if you look at this volume, just the Austronesians, the ANU Press, I was one of the founders of the ANU Press, which is an open access digital press. And this volume, since its publication, has had a minimum of 15,000 downloads a year, and sometimes as high as 20,000 downloads a year, which is good as a start, but it is now also out of date. And there's so much more work that's been done. So it's, in a sense, I'm happy that people still downloading it, but I'm also saying there is a lot more to the Austronesians than what you find in that volume. Okay, so the comparative Austronesian volumes, there are total in total there have been 8 volumes. Whether there'll be another 9 volumes, I don't know. I am myself, and I've been working on this for many, many years, not full time, but when I've had opportunity. The question that struck me when you interrogate the existing literature on Austronesian kinship or Austronesian relationship terminologies, as I say it, when you interrogate that literature, you see that the number of case studies, the number of well-documented studies on which generalizations are made come to, I would say, a handful, maybe a dozen at most, where people have sort of generalized from a supposed terminology to something about the nature of the kinship system. I think perhaps the worst offenders are not anthropologists, but linguists, telling us exactly what the Austronesians were like. It makes no sense, because you end up with all sorts of contradictions, seeming contradictions. So I set out at the beginning of, when the project was in place, I started gathering terminologies. And really, it has become an obsession. I have now gathered and set up in my own simple system over 500 Austronesian terminologies. And reaching 500, I think I have something that could approximate representative coverage of every Austronesian region, sub-region in the Austronesian speaking world. Things begin to fall in place. When you're using that much data, you begin to see very clear patterns. So since about 2014, I have been publishing papers indicating what I think is the organization of the Austronesian family, of the terminologies, and it tells you a great deal about the Austronesians. But you could say I've reversed what, say, the linguists have been doing. The linguists have been always trying to take us back and identify a proto-system. And if you know the proto-system, you know the whole system. My attitude is, if you know the proto-system, and that is somewhat difficult because when you take it back to Taiwan, you've got 5 different branches of the Austronesian family. And what you see transmitted from Taiwan to the Philippines, Borneo, and the rest of the Austronesian world is multiple possibilities from Taiwan. There isn't one possibility, so you don't have a clear, in my view, you don't have a clear possibility of establishing one proto-system. Anyway, put that aside. I'm not interested in proto-system. I'm interested in where the innovations in the system occur. Where in Austronesian terminologies do you get a radical change? And so I have been looking at where the system changes and where it changes and what it changes to. So I'm looking at the development of the system and the development of the system as it moves out of Taiwan through the Philippines, Borneo, into Indonesia, and then down through Sulawesi, into Eastern Indonesia, out into the Pacific, or out into Madagascar. There are lots of changes. And so my study, I've written now probably the data alone for this, the terminologies alone will probably come to about 700 pages, but the analysis of these is already about 300. But then once you've analyzed them, you still haven't explained them because you have to show how in different regions, how each of the different regions is formed. So it's a big project, and that's the one that I am now primarily concerned with as a project. I have a project, I have dozens of projects going, but you could say that's my main comparative project. I wrote here's another thing. This was a diversion. I described it initially as an entertainment, but while I was on Roti, I gathered a tale about a lost fishhook. And this lost fishhook then has to be retrieved. So it's a tale that involves bringing back the fishhook and returning the fishhook, and then all of all of the things that occur when that. And in the course of my readings, because I'm constantly reading about Austronesian populations, I began running into other versions of it. And then I ran into the fact that the Kojiki and the Nihongi, which were books of Japanese folk tales, the earliest pages of both of them have this same tale. Same tale, remarkably similar. And so to entertain myself, I started gathering these. And I developed a compendium of 30 some, I don't remember, 33 versions of this lost fishhook and whatnot. And also the fishhook can turn into a spear in some areas where there are land-based populations. And I went and analyzed it. I'm not finding a secret meaning to it. I'm analyzing how it's put together. How you put together a tale, how you do this. And I've written a book, a long book, which I entitled A Tale Retold. And it looks at all these versions, and I've submitted it. It's been accepted, and I think it will come out next year from Helsinki in the Folklore Fellows series. And it's some would say it's dedicated. It's dedicated to Lévi-Strauss and to Vladimir Pop, because those are the two very different folklorists of a sort. I've dedicated to them and depart from both of them. But it's no, I wouldn't call it my mythologique. But it's maybe one. It's not a symphony. It's maybe a cantata, but it's something that's coming out. But it does present problems that I can't solve. Is that it shows that there has been transmission, Austronesian transmission, in another path, which you would never have thought of, direct from Taiwan up to Japan, and then from Taiwan down through the Pacific all the way to Timor. So there are a lot of different byways of Austronesian. So Austronesian is where I'm focused. I want to end this talk and hold up another book. I haven't spoken about Marshall Sahlins. Marshall Sahlins was an abiding interest. Marshall Sahlins' writing was an abiding interest from the time I was an undergraduate at Harvard, and I read his first book comparing social structures in the Pacific. And I've often thought I would like to do a rewrite of that book and present my own analysis of how those societies are. But I don't think I'll ever have time to do it. But I want to hold up Marshall's book, published posthumously. Well, I should also explain that I met Marshall when he visited. I never met Marshall until he visited the ANU. And we got on when he visited the ANU, and he signed all his, I did have, and I had in my library the stack of all his books from the beginning to the end. And I got him to sign them, and he labeled them Marshall is always making jokes. He was always making jokes. And so he had labeled some. He wrote in one of his books, this is early Sahlins, but I've learned a lot from that Sahlins. Okay, Marshall, that was Marshall. He invited me to the University of Chicago. I spent 2 terms with him there. I I had to teach something, so David Schneider had retired, and so I ended up teaching kinship a la David Schneider at University of Chicago. But the real joy was teaching the Austronesian course with Marshall. And I was talking about Indonesia, he was talking about the Pacific, but we're talking about the same thing. So Marshall is someone I admired, stimulated. I didn't always agree with him. That's not the point. The point is engaged. And I wrote a long piece, a memoir of Marshall Sahlins, which I published, maybe a couple of years ago after his death, trying to sort out in my own mind just what Marshall has done. And Marshall's done a lot. And I just want to hold up to the camera his book published posthumously. This is called The New Science of the Enchanted Universe, an Anthropology of Most of Humanity. I would say that I am still pondering, still thinking about, still wondering and trying to accommodate what he writes. I think in a strange way, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think in a strange way, this is one of the most important books written in anthropology. When did it appear? It appeared after he had died. The date of publication was 22. Okay. So I think this is one of the most important volumes that has been published recently. This is one to think about. And I think if we continually interrogate what we're doing, and Marshall was always doing that, I think that's where anthropology continues to be of value. The continuous interrogation. So on that note, I think I've said enough, and I thank you for inviting me to make these recordings.